Hey guys, it's Miss Willis. So today we are looking at heart structures right before we do our heart dissection. So woohoo! Okay, let's get in here. So we know that your heart is what pushes blood to your whole body, right? And just keep in mind too, if you recall back from when we've done the different blood vessels, that the blood that actually flows through the heart and gets pushed everywhere is not feeding the tissues of the heart, right? This is going to go to your major blood vessels, right? Your aorta, and that's going to be where then that blood with new oxygen on it can be pumped also to the tissues of the heart. So everything flowing on the inside of the heart is just getting transferred to the next place. It's not actually feeding the heart. Okay, it is surrounded, your whole heart is surrounded by what is called the pericardium. It looks like a giant whitish clear sac around the heart. Okay, it's filled with a fluid so that we have what's called the pericardial cavity, and that is going to prevent, like, every time that the heart beats, right? Every time the heart beats, it's not rubbing up against other things causing friction. Because think if that was going, especially if you were doing activity, right? It's speeding up and then you start making all that heat. If there is fluid between those areas that are rubbing against each other, then we're not going to have all that buildup of friction. Okay, there are 4 chambers in here. We have the right and left atria, which are at the top. We have the right and left ventricle at the bottom. Remember that those terms, right and left, are from the patient. So we are looking at a person from the front here. So this is the right atrium. Over here is the left atrium. Down here is the right ventricle. Over here is the left ventricle. And then this is located in the thoracic cavity within your chest, under your ribs, right? Just behind your sternum. So when we look at this in a human, okay, we can break down the thoracic cavity into another section, which is called the mediastinum. So that is the very middle part of the thoracic cavity, so not including your lungs. And it houses your heart, okay? Your heart is not straight up and down. It is tipped just slightly, and it points toward the left. So again, left from the perspective of the patient, so out this way. Also notice that it is attached to the diaphragm. Here is all the diaphragm stretched here and through here. There is a little ligament that attaches those together. Okay, when we look at this in a slightly easier way to see all of it, we see how the heart actually, like, literally points over to the side. It's mostly to the left of the sternum. Okay, so it's not straight up and down behind here. How about the size of the heart? For the most part, we talk about how our heart's about the size of our fist, maybe a little bit bigger. No people that are of different heights have the same size heart, and also your heart will change size based on your like how much cardiovascular ability you have as well. So like people who run more versus who are couch potatoes, right? That's going to make your heart a different size too. But just right off the bat, a person who's really tall and really muscular versus a person who is super short, and we don't even have to talk about whether they're muscular or not, that shorter person is going to have a smaller heart. Okay, looking again at that covering of the heart, this is what I was saying with the, it looks just like a sac that is sitting around it. Okay, it looks like, it almost looks like a ligament. It's not a ligament though, so maybe you'd think of like fascia when we've looked at our other stuff, right? The saran wrap of the body. So that pericardium, and it's filled with fluid. So if you guys remember back from your freshman year when you dissected the pigs, a lot of them had this still around their hearts when you cut those open. So let's look at the wall of the heart, the actual tissues that make up the wall of the heart that actually does the pumping, okay? On the outside part that would be pushed against the pericardium we were just talking about is the epicardium. Okay, it's upon. Epi in a word means upon, and so this would be upon the outer laying of the heart. Okay, then we have the myocardium just inside of that. Myo means muscle, so this is the actual muscular part that does all of the squeezing. And then there's a lining on the inside, and this is the stuff that all of the blood actually touches as it's being pumped from chamber to chamber, and that's called endocardium. Okay, there are these special fibers within there called Purkinje fibers, and you'll see that they look like, they almost look like, noodles isn't the right word because I don't want you to think of the wrong thing when we look in here. But it looks like there's like holes, kind of like in a cave that's behind a tree. I don't know. Maybe this is a weird example. I'll just point it out when we see the next picture. Okay, and those fibers have the nerves that allow for the heart to actually receive the signals to beat. Okay, so looking here, this is what I was talking about with Purkinje fibers. It looks like holes and noodles. I don't want you to think of noodles specifically, though. Might be difficult because in this picture we aren't seeing the tendons that are stretching into these areas. Okay, as we get further into our pictures, it'll make more sense. Okay, so we have that pericardial sac on the inside. We have fluid in our area between that. So there's like the hardened part of the pericardium and then the actual fibrous part that we could touch. Okay, if you recall us talking about serous membranes, right? They have fluid flowing within them, right? To decrease friction. So that serous pericardium is just the inside lining where the fluid will be between those two structures. Okay, so with that, out here, we have the pericardium, right? In that space where the fluid would be, that is the pericardial cavity. And then we have the epicardium here on the outside. We have the myocardium, which is the thick muscle. And then on the inside, this whitish layer, and then that is continuous with all of these tubes. Tubes would be a better word than noodles, sorry. Tubes and holes would be your endocardium. Okay, so looking through this. All right, my camera's in the way again. Myocardium up there. And then endocardium. All right, looking at this on actual muscle tissue. So do you see how this has kind of the noodle look? That itself are those little tendons I was talking about. These are going to be the not the chambers, but like the doors that help close one chamber from the other. And then behind it are the endocardium with the Purkinje fibers. Okay, so labeling the two parts again, or three parts again. We have the endocardium on the inside, we have the epicardium on the outside, and then the myocardium is that nice, thick, juicy part of the heart. Okay, I don't know if you guys have like ever seen like the movies where that's like a thing and like the people are eating the raw heart or whatever. That was in, I know it was in Game of Thrones, it was in what, like, that's like the one that first popped into my mind. There's a lot of nutrients in the heart, right? Because there's a lot of nutrients in blood, and so yeah, it's a really meaty part, just like when you eat like chicken breast or chicken thighs or whatever other animal, those different areas, this is a very thick, dense, meaty part as well. Okay, so then we can label some structures. I'll try to get my camera out of the way as we are moving along. Start off, number one is showing us the aorta. You should know that from the blood vessels. 2 is the superior vena cava. This is where all of the, this means upper giant vein is what this means. Okay, cavernous vein. And it's where all of the blood vessels from above the heart, so your head and your arms, all of those dump in. We'll have the inferior down here at the bottom. Okay, for number 3, this is the right pulmonary artery. It is going from this structure here, or sorry, from this structure here, and stretching and going around, okay, because it's going to go to, pulmonary means lungs, And so it's going to branch off to your right lung. Number 4 is the pulmonary veins. This is the blood returning from the lungs that has new oxygen on it, and those go behind the heart and dump through here and go down into this chamber. I'm not pointing well with my arrow here, sorry. They come into the atrium and then they'll go down to the ventricle. Okay. Then number 5, the right atrium. So atrium versus ventricle. Think of actually drawing a heart on a structure, right? The heart, like the Valentine's Day heart you guys see, isn't the same thing as this, right? They look very different. But sorry if that seemed choppy. I had to erase some stuff because the markers weren't showing up. Okay, so let me draw like the Valentine's Day heart just to help us with remembering atrium versus ventricle. Okay, our heart, think of like the letters A. The atrium are on top. The atria is plural. Okay, and then this is the split down here, and so we have a V over here and a V over here. So watch me actually draw atrium versus ventricle. Okay, when we're saying that the atria are on top, the ventricles are on bottom, right? I don't know, people in the past have said it helped them remember, so I wanted to include it for you guys too. Okay, so atrium. Have you ever been to like a fancy hotel or building and it's like, this is the Martin Luther King atrium, you know, it's like the grand entrance that you walk into this hotel or building. And atrium means like welcoming center, the area where everyone comes into it. And so anytime that your heart is coming from somewhere else in the body, it is going to go into one of the atria. That's the plural of atrium. Okay, so right atrium is coming from the body. Left atrium is coming from the lungs. Okay, let's click the next one. Number 6 here is the tricuspid valve. So the cuspid valves are the ones that I was saying, these are like the tendons that are stretching in there, and so I didn't want to use spaghetti as the word in the last couple of images. Tricuspid valves are weaker than these ones that are going to help with blood going to the different parts of the body. Okay, just going from the atrium down into the ventricle. We don't need a whole lot, but we need something to close so that as we squeeze, blood isn't just going back and forth. Like think if you had a balloon and you could just like squeeze at either end and it's just moving the air from one side to the other. But if we can block off part of that, when we squeeze the air, it'll go into one side and it stays over there, right? It's like how, I shouldn't even say a balloon, like if you've ever pumped up a ball before, or if you've used one of those hand pumps to blow up a balloon, right? When you squeeze that air, you want it to go into the balloon, but when you let go, you don't want the air to get sucked back into it. So there's a little valve that makes it only flow in one direction. That's exactly what these valves are doing in your heart. As blood gets pushed into one place, we don't want it to get pushed back into the other. And so we have, these two are called cuspid valves, the ones that are between the atrium and the ventricles. And the first one is the tricuspid valve. And they are like little tendons with a sheet tendon on top. And have you guys ever like seen old movies where they'll say that someone has a crush on somebody, or they make their heart go pitter patter, or they are tugging on their heartstrings? These are your heartstrings. That's actually where that phrase comes from. These are the little literal heartstrings that are in your heart that, you know, if your heart starts beating faster, then these are opening and closing faster. And so that's where that phrase comes from, okay? Because when you see your crush, you get like, right? Your heart starts beating faster. I don't know. Maybe you don't like anybody, so that hasn't happened to you. Then we get down here to the right ventricle, okay? This is going to push blood to our lungs. It's going to go up here and go to the left. It's going to go up here and go to the right of the patient. Oh, goodness. Notice how the wall of this ventricle here is much thinner than that surrounding the other side. our lungs are not very far away from our heart, and so it just needs to get pushed up and over to the sides. And so we don't need too strong of a squeeze from the heart when that happens. And so that's why that wall is so much thinner versus on this side, it's super thick. Okay. Number 8 down here, inferior vena cava. This is going up the back side of the heart and also reaches up to the right atrium. This is bringing all the blood back from everything below your heart. So your abdominal organs, your legs, things like that. Okay, then looking at my picture over here, my camera's a little bit in the way. Number 9 is labeled here. And so it is pointing at this part. This is the left pulmonary artery. So this is the pulmonary trunk. And then when they split into right and left, okay, so now this is the left pulmonary artery. It is taking blood to your lungs in order to get new oxygen on it. Working our way down with number 10. So after the blood has been at the lungs, it has to come back. And so these are your left pulmonary veins. Again, pulmonary is referring to lungs. And then that dumps into here, which is your left atrium. Again, atrium is any time that the blood is entering the heart from somewhere else. Then that brings us down here to the bicuspid valve. It's also called the mitral valve. So notice tricuspid versus bicuspid is 3 versus 2. That has to do with how many tendons are attaching inside the heart. How I remembered the difference between the two of them is that when blood first enters your heart, it comes in on this side, and there's more that has to be done to the blood, and that's why this one's the tricuspid valve, versus after it goes to the lungs and it comes back, it still needs to leave the heart, but there's less to do, and that would make this one the bicuspid valve, right? There's more, right? 3 is higher than 2. There's less that still has to be done, so 2 is bi in a word means 2. Less to do with it over here, if that helps you remember. Bicuspid valve is also called the mitral valve, and this is called this. This one always makes me laugh, but I always tell it. This was named the mitral valve because it looked like a bishop's mitre, which is a hat. If you are familiar with the different costumes, may not be the right word, of a bishop, a cardinal, the pope, all the like Christianity and stuff. Catholicism is a type of Christianity. So you get what I'm saying. They wear these big tall hats. I mean, have you ever seen it? And someone looked at the bicuspid valve and said, "Hey, that looks like a bishop's mitre. It has like a little like whoop whoop type of arch that I can't do with this hat." And I don't see it when I look in there, but somebody did, and they called it that, and it stuck. So cool story, I know. Over here is the aortic semilunar valve. So this is the semilunar valves are much stronger. They aren't just little ligaments and sheets. These actually are collapsings of the arteries, so that when we squeeze the chamber, this valve opens, and when we open it, it sucks part of the artery back closed, and that prevents any blood from flowing backwards. So it just like collapses shut, right? These were my arms were the wall of the artery, and then when we squeeze the blood to move forward, it opens up, and when we recoil, right, we open the chamber back up to get new blood, and it collapses down so that it's shut. Number 14 is showing us the left ventricle. I mentioned earlier how much thicker this wall is, because this is going to be the ventricle that squeezes blood to your entire body, and it needs to be a lot stronger, and so there's more muscle on this side. 15 is showing us the descending aorta. So up here at the aorta, these 3 guys up here go to your head and arms. Okay, then this swings around and down behind the heart, down here, and this is going to take the blood to your abdominal organs and your legs. That's the descending aorta. And then 16 over here is the pulmonary semilunar valve. Same thing as I was talking about with this one here. It's the collapsing in of that artery. to prevent blood from flowing backwards. And this is the one that is between the ventricle and heading to the lungs. That's why it's pulmonary semilunar valve. Versus the one over here was the aortic, right? It's between the ventricle and the aorta. So it's the aortic semilunar valve. One other structure that I don't have labeled on here for you to know is this one right here. Between the two ventricles, that is called the septum, there is a thick wall of muscle, of that myocardium, between the two ventricles. Okay, and that's called the septum. There can be a leak in the septum, and when that happens, when we have blood coming back from the body, it hasn't gone to the lungs yet. If there's a leak between here, then when this chamber squeezes to move blood to the lungs, some of it's going to get spilled over into the left ventricle, and then when the left ventricle squeezes to send blood to the body, some of that blood doesn't have new oxygen on it, and so we're sending deoxygenated blood cells around your body, and now your cells everywhere else aren't getting the oxygen that they need. Okay. We can also talk later about like leaky valves and how things move back and forth too, because we'll talk about this duct that closes up, because we don't actually need this side of your heart before you're born, because you don't have working lungs before you're born, right? When you're still communicating with mom through your belly button, you don't need that side of your heart to be getting oxygen onto your blood through your lungs. And so we have like a little hole that skips that, and it's supposed to scar over when you're born and your lungs inflate with your first breath of air. And some kids it doesn't happen, and so they end up with a disorder going on there. We can talk about it later. Okay, so just as a reminder, the atria are receiving blood. Ventricles are going to pump it somewhere else. The right ventricle sends deoxygenated blood to your lungs. Left ventricle sends newly oxygenated blood to the rest of your body. Okay. Also, going back to this picture, I feel like this is a really great image of the heart. Okay, the right atrium. Okay, the left atrium. These are nice and inflated. When you guys see these on the actual hearts, they're going to be collapsed because there's not blood flowing in them. They're not opening and closing anymore. They've just kind of, become flaccid. Here's those heartstrings I was talking about. So we have 1, 2, 3 major sections where those fibers are coming down, and then 1, 2. So we have tricuspid valve versus bicuspid valve. You can also see here, really well here on the pulmonary semilunar valve, that area where the vessel like collapses down to close this vessel when we are recoiling, when we're opening back up the chamber to get more blood. And then you can kind of see a little bit of it for the aortic semilunar valve there. You'll see more of that image as we move forward. So this is what I was saying with those valves, okay? Tricuspid controls blood between the right atrium and ventricle. The bicuspid, also called the mitral valve, is controlling blood between the left atrium and ventricle. Pulmonary semilunar valve is going from blood from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery. Aortic semilunar valve, sometimes you'll just hear aortic valve, pulmonary valve. Semilunar is part of the official name, so make sure you know it. But if you just see someone say pulmonary valve, this is what they're talking about, right? This one here. You just hear someone say aortic valve, it's this one here that they're talking about. You will hear me say their full names. Okay, another great image of the heart, right? This is normally where I would show you a video of how blood flows through the heart. I'll tell you about it. You can look it up on YouTube. I can't play it here or I'll get copyrighted issues and they'll delete my video. But blood comes back from the body through the vena cava. It goes into the right atrium. It passes the tricuspid valve and goes down to the right ventricle. When the right ventricle squeezes, it's going to go past the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary artery and head off in both these directions. They don't show the other side of it over here, to your lungs. It's going to come back from your lungs, 2 on this side and 2 on this side, through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. It's going to go past the bicuspid, aka mitral valve down into the left ventricle, then that is going to squeeze that freshly oxygenated blood past the aortic valve into the aorta, and it's either going to go into one of these 3 arteries or swing down and around to go to the descending aorta and into your abdominal organs and legs. And then once it gets to all of those places, it comes back through the veins and dumps here again. Okay, there's a nice little song that you can learn to memorize that. The song is from the show Happy Days, which has the Fonz. Hey, right? It's a terrible impression, but you'll see it when you know it, or whatever. Scratch that, reverse it. And yeah, you can use that to help you with memorizing it. It does not say every single structure, but it does go in the correct order. Okay, so then the types of blood vessels. Arteries are always carrying blood away from the heart. So that's where it's confusing when people are like, but so arteries are red and blood veins are blue. No. Arteries carry blood away from the heart and veins carry blood to the heart. Arteries have a really thick muscular wall. They actually have a pulse. Right? Your veins do not have a pulse. They don't have a muscular wall. Okay? So, as arteries branch into smaller and smaller sections, those are called arterioles. And then at the end of arterioles, there are going to be these things called capillaries. This is when blood cells get into a skinny enough hallway, right? A skinny enough vessel that they are actually like pushed against the sides of the walls. And this is where the diffusion of oxygen on the blood cell goes off into the cells, and carbon dioxide comes back onto the blood cells, and then they get through to the other side, and they start heading back toward the heart. Okay, on the other side of a capillary are going to be really tiny veins called venules, and as those start to convene together, they make up larger vessels that would be called veins, and veins are carrying blood to the heart. Again, they have a much thinner wall. This is part of why people end up with spider veins and varicose veins, is because there isn't like a strong musculature here, and so those blood vessels can just kind of collapse, sits in them, or blood sits pooling in them, and we actually rely on our muscular movements to help push blood through our veins to get back to our heart. That's why when you're like standing in line, say that you're standing in line for like a roller coaster or to get into the movies, you're standing there for a long time and you start, shifting, lifting your legs up, trying to bend, right? And it's because as you are just sitting there being still, blood is pooling in your feet, at your knees, at your hips. It's not so much at your arms. That was just for emphasis because I know you can't see my whole body. And as we have our muscles move, that helps squeeze the veins, and that's going to push the blood forward. Question is, well, how come, like with the chambers pushing things back and forth, how, if we don't have the valves, then how does blood always move forward? Veins do have like little valves that can catch blood to keep it from moving forward, but it doesn't keep it from moving backward, but it does not propel itself forward. It relies on your muscular skeletal muscles for that movement. Okay, so this is again reviewing the pathway of blood through your heart and body. So it's going through all your veins, right? It's coming back toward the heart. All those veins convene together in the vena cava. Then it goes to the right atrium. Between the right atrium and the right ventricle, it's going to go past the tricuspid valve. Then we get to the right ventricle. Then it's going to go past the pulmonary semilunar valve in order to get to the pulmonary artery. It splits into the right and left to get to the lungs. Comes back from the lungs through the pulmonary vein. Gets to the left atrium. It'll then pass the mitral or bicuspid valve to get to the left ventricle. And then when the left ventricle squeezes, it goes past the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta. And then that starts branching into smaller arteries. Those start branching into smaller arteries called arterioles. At the end of arterioles are really small nets of blood vessels called capillaries. And then on the other side of capillaries, we now have done the gas exchange. So we're bringing blood back toward the heart. And so on the other side of capillaries are those venules, really small veins. And then as those venules start convening together, they build up into larger veins, and then those are going to bring us all the way back up to the top and get back to the vena cava. Okay, so Pumps Your Blood is the name of that song I was telling you about. I can't play these things. These are 2 animations. You can click on them through the link on the Google Slides, but I can't play them for you in this video. Okay, and then that's it for the notes for today. We had heart structures, right? Looking at the lining of the heart, right? The outside pericardium, endocardium, epicardium, myocardium, naming all the different structures, the different chambers, the valves, and then identifying the different types of blood vessels. Okay, so review them if you need to, and I'll see you next time.